I think this is the first time I've ever done a panel in a room that also had a pool table. So.
That's
awesome. You know? I did, for years I did children's theater, and we toured and we did shows in elementary schools and rec centers and all kinds of stuff. And one time we had to set up our show, and there was a pool table in the middle of the room, like right in the, and it was a very small room. And I remember I was trying to do the play around the pool table. Oh, it brings back memories. Anyway, hi, I'm Tiffany Grant, and this is theoretically a panel about anime script adapting. Wow, it's so exciting. I can feel the excitement in the room. Wow, yay! Woo! I know. So I've been working in anime now for a little over 25 years. And started out, of course, as a voice actor, which I still am a voice actor. And the first thing I did by way of any kind of script writing in anime was actually doing some adapting work for subtitles. So back when ADV Films was a brand new thing, it was a really small operation with just a few people running the show. And as the company started expanding and they needed to have more people kind of pitching in, I was approached by Matt Greenfield, who had been doing basically everything in relation to production. He asked me if I could work on some subtitles for a few shows. So the way that worked was, I had the translation and I had the video, and it was just up to me to kind of polish the translation a little bit. The guy who was doing the translations back then, I don't remember his family name, but his given name was Ichiro, and we used to refer to his translations as being written in Ichi-ese. They were, they were kind of English, anyway, but so I worked on that for a few years, kind of tweaking some translations for subtitles. I didn't actually do the physically the subtitling, the timing, and putting them into the. I did not do that. But so after a couple of years, they finally had hired people who were full time to do that, and I no longer, my services were no longer required for that. But actually, the first scripting work that I did that was for dubbing was all of Asuka's German dialogue in Evangelion. So I did do that. And that was just sort of a happy coincidence of circumstances that I was cast as Asuka, and I could also speak German, and we decided that we really wanted to emphasize the fact that she was German and that she could speak German by kind of just peppering that in her dialogue. I like to kind of refer to it as the like the Ricky Ricardo syndrome, where anybody who's watched I Love Lucy, every time Lucy went off and did some harebrained thing, and then Ricky would blow his top and he would start yelling at her in Spanish. And so I was like, it's kind of a similar thing. Like, Shinji does something stupid, and then Asuka starts yelling at him in German, and he doesn't know what she's saying. So we kind of went with that theme. But I'm not saying anything different. I'm not changing the storyline or making Asuka nice all of a sudden. She's not saying, "Oh, I love you, Shinji, you're the greatest guy ever." She's definitely not saying that in German. So we just thought it added a little bit of extra flavor to her character, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it tremendously, getting to put that in there. So that was really my first kind of script adapting that I did for dubbing, but it wasn't even in English. And years went by. 2003, anime production was really picking up around that time, and there were a lot of shows that were in production. So many shows that were being dubbed, and the industry was really booming. And before that, really anybody who was helming a show, you would have one person who was the producer, the director, and the script writer for that show. And it became obvious that this was a lot to put on one person. So they started kind of dividing these jobs up to where you'd have a producer, a director, a writer. You'd have, different people doing these jobs. And so they started hiring people to write scripts. So I was like, well, I think maybe I could do that. I kind of have some background in this area, and I'm a pretty good writer, so maybe I could do some script adapting. And so I got a test script, and I did it, and I got hired. And anyway, so my first script that I got to write for was the series Angelic Layer, which is by Clamp. It's a 26-episode Clamp series based on a manga. I have to say, I do like the anime a lot more than the manga in this particular case. I thought the manga was kind of weak. But I did read it. It was informative, reading the manga before I worked on the series, And generally speaking, my process is that the shows that I've worked on have been primarily shorter form shows. So I'm able to sit down and watch the entire show before I start working on the script so that I've seen the whole thing. Obviously, if you're talking about working on something like One Piece or Fairy Tale and those kind of things that just go on until the apocalypse, Clarine Harp, who worked for many, many years as a production manager at Funimation, she said, when you looked at the production chart on the wall for all the different shows that were in production, like the finish date for One Piece, it said something like the apocalypse or something like that. So, it will never be done. Anyway, but so yeah, I worked on shows typically that would be like 26 episodes or maybe 12 episodes or whatever. So, after Angelic Layer, I did Hello Kitty's Animation Theater. I did Sister Princess. I did Go Danner. I worked on The Wallflower, Tears to Tiara. I did the second season of All My Goddess, All My Goddess Flights of Fancy, the TV series of All My Goddess. Anyway, a bunch of stuff. There were a bunch of them. And the last thing that I actually did scripts for was about 3 years ago, Girls Unpanzer Der Film, which was a nightmare because there were something like 100 or maybe more than 100 named characters in that show. Wow, and a lot of them look really, really alike. They're like this team, and it'll be Team Tortoise or whatever, and they all wear matching outfits. It's like, oh my gosh, it's so blinking difficult. So, the person who's working on subtitles is pretty easy because you just need to get across the idea of what's being said. There doesn't have to be a character attribution. But if you're doing a script that's for dubbing, every single line of dialogue, even not a line of dialogue, like a sigh or a scream or a yelp or whatever, it all has to be attributed to a person because an actor is going to come in and do it. So when the director is working out the budget and how many lines each character has, all of those lines have to be attributed correctly to someone. And even if it's, Tortoise team member C or whatever, it has to be attributed, and you need to really be sure that they're attributed correctly, that it's like, oh gosh, wait a minute, which character is this? And you have to go back and see, is this character here, is that the same person who had this line back in the scene? It was hard. It was really, really hard. Girls on Panzer Der Films. It was difficult. Plus, there were parts of it that were in Russian, and I do not speak Russian, so I was of no help. I was like, you're on your own with the Russian. There was some German dialogue in there, and that was fine. I could work on that. So if that didn't fit, whatever was in the script, whatever was in the translation, if it didn't fit, I could rework it into something that would fit in the mouth flaps. Because this is the thing, is the animation is done. The animation is not going to be changed. So when you're writing a script for a show that's going to be dubbed, it needs to match what the mouth movements are. They're generally speaking, for the most part, most anime, it's not really animated phonetically. So the mouths aren't moving in some kind of human phonetic mouth placement. They're just doing this, flappity, 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 flap. They're just opening and closing, and that's it. But at least if the dialogue starts and stops at the right time, you're pretty golden on that. But yeah, so that is fixed. So the script has to be adapted to where it's going to fit into those mouth flaps. You know, somebody asked me years ago, why did Asuka call Rey Wonder Girl? I said, I think it was because we needed a word that had 3 syllables in it. So that's for real the answer. Also, I just like that, Wonder Girl. It's pretty awesome. And listen, if you guys have questions at any time, please interject that. Yes?
Yeah, you said the lip flaps don't match for any phonetic thing. Does that include the Japanese as well?
Right, yes. They're not, so generally speaking, most Western animation is done what is called prelay, which means the actors all come in, they record the dialogue, and then animators, after the fact, animate it to match phonetically the mouth placement. So if you're watching whatever Western cartoon you want to think of, it's the Simpsons or the Flintstones or South Park or whatever, it generally speaking, their mouth looks like they're saying the words that you're hearing. In Japan, unless you're talking about something like a Studio Ghibli that's a really high end, those they do in a prelay recording style. But for like the anime TV series, they do not. So like the animation is happening, the voice recording is happening, but those are not synced up. So they don't animate to match the vocal recordings, neither do they record the voices to match animation that is finished. So it's kind of a weird hybrid process. Recording studio time in Japan is incredibly expensive. So they're doing it in the most expeditious and economical fashion that they can. But no, I mean, the mouths are not animated to be any like actual human phonetic sounds of any sort whatsoever. They just sort of open and close randomly. And the animators may be told something like, oh, you know, have the character talk for 3 seconds, or he needs to yell, or, you know, whatever, something, you know, like that. But they don't necessarily have a script of what the characters are going to say, so they don't know like exactly how many times their mouth should move or whatever. So they may or may not know that. But yeah, it doesn't match anything. So yeah, but like I say, if you can just get it to where the dialogue is the right length as far as the voice actor is talking, they start and stop talking when the little animated mouth starts and stops moving, that is fantastic. That's what your sweet spot is. That's where you need to aim for that, because we cannot change the animation. The animation is done. So it's pretty much, this is a standard way that dubbing is done. So if you were in Brazil dubbing a German show into Portuguese, this is how it's done. This is the standard, universally adopted method for shows being dubbed. So you have a translation that's done, and then you have a script adapter who writes the script based on that translation, and then the actors all come in one at a time, and they match the flaps. They record for that one character or multiple characters, however many characters that actor is doing. So each actor comes in one at a time to match that, and that's pretty much the standard process. So therefore, I have worked on many, many shows with other actors that I have never in my life met and could I not identify in a lineup. That's just a fact of the way that it is, that I don't ever see these people. I don't actually work with them in person. Yeah.
I guess the longer you've been working, have you seen any change in the amount of, I guess, oversight or how tightly they hold the reins with the localization step, like after the translation?
Oh, I love that word, localization. That is really what it is. It really varies from project to project.
Okay.
So I don't see it as any kind of necessarily like it's more this way than now than it was then or whatever. It's just, it really comes down to the project. how much the original licensors want to be involved with it. I mean, some shows, there's a lot of supervision. At some shows, they want to be particularly involved with certain aspects, but not everything. Like maybe they want to have casting approval over the main characters, or like when we worked, for example, on the original dub of Neon Genesis Evangelion, that was very heavily supervised by Gynax at the time. In the days when I think they were literally FedExing the scripts across the Pacific Ocean, and they were coming back with red ink on them, and change this and make this a certain way, whatever. So there was a lot of supervision over that. But, for the most part, I think there's usually a pretty good understanding between the licensor and the distributor, like the U.S. distributor, that they know that they're going to take care with these shows, that they're not going to be screwing around with it just for the heck of it. So when you have a show where a great deal of it is changed, like on Shin-Chan, for example, that's also something that's agreed to in advance. So it's not like Funimation just says, oh, we're going to screw those people, we're just going to do whatever the hell we want with this show. I mean, it's not like that at all. It's a show that, the humor was such that it really did not translate directly very well into English. And what they really wanted was for us to localize that in a way that would just be really, really funny. And there were a bunch of script writers I know that worked on Shin-Chan, and I worked on, I don't remember exactly, 6 or 8 episodes of that show, and the scripts were really funny, and almost every line had multiple alternates where they were just really trying for a while. It was airing on Cartoon Network, and they were really just trying to see what they could get past the censors, So a lot of the slang in there was they would get things off of like an online urban dictionary kind of thing, and some of the lines I know, I was looking at them and I would ask the director, I was like, what does this line even mean? What am I saying? And they would go, oh, well, this is slang for such and I would go, oh my gosh, do you think we can get away with that? And they'd say, well, we're going to try. So sometimes we'd have to record a few different versions of the line in case, in case it got axed. But, so yeah, even shows where they are radically changed, like the original recording of One Piece, for example, that's all stuff that's agreed to in advance, but when the licensing agreements are done. So it's not like, oh, those darned American companies are getting away with this or whatever. It's not. I mean, that's just not how it is. I mean, when it comes down to the bottom line, it is a business, and the Japanese companies and the American companies too, they want to make money off of this. So really, for the most part, they, I think, do a pretty good job with sticking to the integrity of the original material. And for me, the shows that I've worked on, all of the shows that I've done scripts for have been ones where we're really staying very true to the original story. And for me, my number one, my North Star, my guiding light is intent. So I am always thinking for every character, for every scene, every line of dialogue, I'm always thinking about what is the intent, what was the intention with this scene, with this line, with this character, and we speak so often in metaphors, and very little of what people say, if you actually stop and think of it, very, very little of it is literal. We use a lot of expressions to get our points across that if you translate just exactly what's said into another language, it might not carry over. So it's really important to think about what the intention is of something. And I just like to use examples of, say, if let's say two characters are talking, they said, well, I don't think that guy's elevator goes all the way to the top floor. Well, you know, they're not literally talking about an elevator. So if you had someone translating that line into another language and they don't have that expression, it just sounds like you're talking about the Big Bang Theory. I don't know. It's like, you know, their elevator isn't working. That's sad. They have to climb a lot of stairs. But that's not what it's about. So, you know, you really have to keep in mind what is the intention of the line. And I think as long as you stay true to the intention, then that's good. And also, like, is it a comedy? Is this a drama? Is it serious? Is it a character who talks in puns all the time? You know, that kind of thing. So you have to always keep an eye on that and make sure that you're being faithful to that original material. That's very, very important to me. Anybody with the questions about the anime and the things? So one of the arguments that comes up a lot of times is a lot of people get fixated on certain elements of the like Japanese culture or language that may not really translate that well, such as, I'm going to say it, honorifics. Okay? Japanese people, here's a newsflash for you, they do not use honorifics to be more Japanesey. They use honorifics, san, chan, kun, sama. They use that because it is an integral part of their language. There is no way for them not to use it. So if they are translating an American movie into Japanese, I promise you that when you're watching The Avengers or you're watching Friends or The Flintstones, whatever you're watching in Japanese, I promise you all of those voice actors are going to be speaking using honorifics. I promise you, they are, because it's an integral part of their language, and it demonstrates a relationship between those characters by the honorifics that they use, or sometimes if they don't use them, which is also a thing. But yeah, so they don't. And the thing is, we don't really have an equivalency of that in English. So I know that there are times when a director will make the choice that they want to use honorifics. I personally think it sounds weird to have people in English calling everyone san and sama and kun. I don't know. I have on occasion used honorifics in shows that I've worked on for specific characters. God, I hate that. For specific characters, when it's, you know, appropriate to the character. One of the examples is the very first show that I did scripts for, Angelic Layer. There are two characters that they're 12 years old, and it's a boy and a girl. They've been childhood friends their whole lives, and the girl has a crush on the guy. I know. And it's such a typical anime trope. But anyway, so she still calls him Kotaro-chan, which is not really a thing that's done. I mean, she should be calling him Kun at this stage of his life. And so the very first scene where the characters are introduced, she runs up to him and she calls him Kotaro-chan. And in the Japanese version, the character says something like, you know, don't call me that anymore, I'm too old for that, or something to that effect. But she continues to call him Kotaro-chan, by the way, through the entirety of the show. And so I said, well, what can I do? Because we don't have any such thing in English that is equivalent. Like, oh, you know, when he was 5, it was okay to call him Kotaro-chan, but now he's 12, and you should be calling him Kotaro-kun. And what can we do? So the thing is, to a Japanese audience, like her running up to him and calling him Chan, they would all be like, oh girl, no you didn't. Because they would know immediately, like, that is not right. This is not, she's assaulting his manliness. So they would, for a Japanese audience, it would really stand out to them for her to be calling him Chan. So I decided to keep it. And when he responds to her in English, he said something like, that's for girls and little kids. You should call me Kun or something like that. So I had him basically kind of define the term, which was a little more on the nose than what it was in the Japanese version. But, you know, it sets the stage for that. So then in the rest of the show, there are no other honorifics used. So my thought was, for the American audience, just the fact that this character is being called Chan, that would make it stand out to the American audience. So again, that was my idea, with like trying to convey the intention of how the characters were addressing each other. So guess what? She has a secret crush on him. What? That never happens in anime? I know. It's like such a standard trope, but yeah.
So it's like in Sailor Moon, Usagi, Usagi calling Mamoru Mamo-chan in the Japanese.
Yeah.
They're she has a crush on him.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's, you know, there are the other one that I did that I had to struggle with was a show called Go Danner, and which I love that show. But so the main characters in the show, they're a married couple, and Anna and Go, and so Anna, who is much younger than her husband, she's 17, and he is, I think he's 29.
Okay.
Anyway, so she doesn't even call him Go Chan. She calls him Go Chin, which is, it's like even a cutesier version of Chan. It's really not a real honorific, but it's just her being like uber cutesy to call him Go Chin. And again, I'm looking at this going, well, what else could she call him? You know, in English. So we thought about it like Go Pie, Go Poo, Gokins. I mean, you know, like what other cutesy things? So ultimately, we just decided to keep it as Go Chen and have her call him Go Chen. I mean, it's not even like a real thing anyway. But yeah, so she calls him Go Chen, and we did keep that. And then he has a little brother who's actually about her same age, and his name is Shinobu. And so she calls him Shinobu Chi, which is even shorter than Chin. But so we left that in there too. So she just called them Go Chin and Shinobu Chi. Yeah. So occasionally, you know, like I say, to me, when it fits, when it works in the storyline, I like it. But, you know, especially when you have, if the characters are Western, you know, if they're European and they're American, I mean, definitely no Americans ever call each other San and Sama and Kun. I mean, we don't really do that in English. So that's, you know, you have to really look at all of these, the cultural things on a case-by-case basis and see how you can convey that. I mean, spoiler, but no Japanese people have ever watched an anime to discover that they put their shoes in a locker at school. This is not a big shocking thing for them. They know that they do that because they do that. So, you know, it's an integral part of their life. So you have to, anytime there are cultural things like that, you have to figure out how you can go about addressing it in a normal way that makes sense in the scheme of the show. But, you know, you want to still keep the intention. In other words, not going back to when they first started dubbing Pokemon and they were calling the rice balls, they were calling them jelly donuts, you know.
Jelly-filled donut.
Eat your hamburgers are called.
Yeah.
Got my jelly-filled donut.
So, yeah.
You were mentioning keeping things where people would understand, is understandable essentially. When they first released the anime for Urusei Yatsura, and I'm probably getting it.
Oh, yeah. I don't work on Urusei Yatsura, but yes, I'm familiar with it.
They said there's a scene at the beginning of the manga where the main character starts throwing in the original Japanese, he's throwing beans at the leader of the aliens. And the idea is that the aliens look like the Japanese version of ogres, so you can get ogres to go away by throwing beans at them. And the person who's doing the English adaptation says, okay, this is a little panel, you have the dialogue there, nobody's going to know what this is, because this was back in like the 80s or 90s.
Yeah.
You can't use footnotes, so he said, what am I going to do? We'll substitute a Western tradition. So they said Halloween, which means the beans become candy, and so the main character's like, oh, I get it, trick or treat, right? Okay, here, candy, go away.
It's tricky because you know there are things like that are customs that are like cultural things, like, and how it's so difficult to figure out sometimes how to deal with some of those things, because in Japan everybody would have gotten the thing with the beans and the ogres because it's part of their culture, but then like beans and ogres, that means nothing to me. And the point of it culturally was that everybody would have been in on the loop, like if, let's say you're talking to somebody and they don't understand what's going on with current events or something, and you might make some reference that they're like, I'm doing a really bad example of this, slept for 100 years.
Sleeping Beauty?
No. Rip Van Winkle, right, Rip Van Winkle. So if you made some reference to them being like, you're Rip Van Winkle because they don't know what's going on in current events, like in other words, you've been asleep for 100 years, but you can shorthand that, like people will talk about trying to find a Goldilocks planet, and you can use these kind of shorthand terms that people get that because they understand, they know the backstory, they're in on the lingo, they know the cultural reference or the story. So it's tricky. So that's true. A lot of times we'll try to find something that's a similar reference, like, okay, well, this is what this thing is in the Japanese culture, so what do we have that's similar? Because again, it's not about a lesson, it's not about trying to teach people that beans will keep ogres away. This is not, because the Japanese people were not learning that. It's a fact of their culture that they already knew. So what can you put in there that's something that's similar, that works? And those are really tricky. Trying to think of something that we had like that. And I know there was, I've done this once or twice, and I can't remember the exact episode or what show, but there were a couple times that I had, characters where they were in school and they were studying. And a lot of times in school, you have these different mnemonic devices that you use to remember certain things that you're learning. So, like in the Japanese, if they were using some kind of mnemonic device to remember something about a famous Japanese historical event, but I might in English have the character say, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Because, again, it's not supposed to be a history lesson. All the Japanese people watching it and hearing the character in Japanese saying whatever their common mnemonic device, they would get that that's what that is. So it's not about the idea that, like, oh, you've changed it, you've ruined the whole anime because now they're not talking about blah, blah, blah. But that's not the intent. That's not the intent. So for me, it's really about what is the intent and trying to convey the same experience. So that's what I want the Western audience who's watching it, the largely American, but then it's also being viewed in in the UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, anyway. But for the audience that we're doing it for them to basically kind of have the same experience. That's what I'm hoping for anyway. Fingers crossed. I mean, it's difficult with a lot of this stuff, And it's much more an art form than an exact science. I mean, you can't just stick the script into, the Japanese script into a machine and then it comes out on the other side of the translatometer and like, oh, here it is and it's perfect. Because, I mean, even just the translation aspect of it, which is the step before I get it, if you gave the same Japanese script to 10 different people who were all bilingual, you'd have 10 different translations because every person is going to have their own gist of what it meant. But probably, I would bet you, if they were all very competent, skilled translators, I bet you could read all 10 of them, and they would still basically be telling you the same story, just maybe with slightly different words, because all of us tend to have a certain vocabulary of words that we like to use, and that's just simply a fact. I mean, I know there was one translator I used to work with a lot, and I would get her scripts, and they would be really, like, I am not prude at all, but her scripts would just have so many profanities in them. And, it's just her trying to convey the idea, because they don't really have profanities exactly in Japanese, so she's trying to convey the emphasis, the impact of what that character is saying by, using some flavorful language in there, but, maybe it's not appropriate for that particular show. I mean, some shows I've worked on, oh yeah, you could totally do that, but you also have to look at, the show that you're working on, like, is this like a sort of a 12 age range show, or is this more of a mature audience, or, what's the target audience for this show? So if you're doing something that's aimed at, middle schoolers, it's not going to be filled with F-bombs or something, or, then also stuff that's appropriate to, like, the time period. A show that I worked on, Tears to Tiara, it's set in pre-medieval times in England, Ireland, and Rome. And so what was really difficult for me on that is like, okay, first of all, we cannot have these people speaking in some kind of Chaucerian English where it's Canterbury Tales. No, we're not going to have people talking like that because that would be crazy. But what I wanted to do was avoid using a lot of like modern colloquialisms in there. And I specifically remember that one line was translated as, "the shit's gonna hit the fan." And I thought, if this is pre-medieval England, that might not be the best way to phrase this line. I get your point, but maybe we'll just say we're gonna be in a lot of trouble. So, anyway, that's something as to, you have to keep in mind, like, what is the setting for this? Is it set in modern times? Is it, what's the time period? Is it set in the United States? Is it set in Japan? Is it set in Europe? Is it in outer space in the future? That all informs your word choices for these characters. And then also, each of the characters is individual. They all have their own personalities, and some of them might be, really uptight or very prim and proper, and some of them might, talk like a sailor, or maybe some of them speak in puns all the time. So you want to make sure that the dialogue for each character really sounds like that character's voice, that it's the way that person would speak. And then, you're going down the whole path of if they have like a Kansai dialect, and oh yes, all of those things, those choices that get made. But it needs an example. Now, I did not write the scripts for this show, but I was in it. But it was called Chrono Crusade, and it was set primarily in the United States, part of it in Europe, but mostly in the United States, in 1929. And Matt Greenfield, who was the director and the script writer on the show, he was able to find online this website that had period slang in it. So we were using a lot of 1920s period slang because it just doesn't sound right if you're doing a show and it's set in 1929 and people are going, oh, it's my bad. Oh, no, you didn't. You know, it's like, no, that's not going to be good. So we wanted to make sure. So people were saying a lot of things like, oh, applesauce, because apparently that was slang back then. So we were using all of the, don't be a Mrs. Grundy. That was a thing. So we were doing all the 1920s slang, and that was pretty fun, I have to say. But, you know, it's just one of those things that you have to be conscientious about when you're working on a show is like what's the setting for the show and what's, you know, appropriate to the time period and the characters and all of those kinds of things. Anybody else with the questions? Yeah? All right. Well, that's okay, because I will just jump right in. Yeah, you go ahead, please.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Are there any situations where there was kind of a change made on the fly early on that ended up having to be addressed in the script because the show kept going and needed to change, like an early colloquial fix, and then you end up with?
Well, see, not so much, because I really try to be aware of, like I said,
what might come up.
Well, yeah, I mean, I watch the show in advance. And so again, the shows that I've worked on, they've all been within a time frame that I actually could watch the entire show. So, I mean, if you're working on something that's like, you know, hundreds and hundreds of episodes, you really can't. I did, just fun fact, there were so many different versions of Sergeant Frog before Funimation started doing it, and I actually wrote scripts for the first 5 episodes of Sergeant Frog. That's one of the jobs that I did back then. I mean, I got paid for it, but they did like 3 different dubs of it at ADV before it ended up going to Funimation. But so it's like, okay, I cannot watch all of Sergeant Frog because it's, as far as I know, it's still going, and it's like hundreds and hundreds of episodes. So I just watched the 5 episodes that I was doing, and I read a couple volumes of the manga. And the person who did the translations that I was working with was also a big Gundam nerd. And that's a thing in the show because the main character is a big Gundam fan, and there's all these Gundam references in the show, so we wanted to make sure that we were getting those right. You know, I've had more, like, one situation that I had was I did the scripts for the 2nd season of the Oh My Goddess TV show. So I sat and watched, it was, each season was 24 episodes. So I sat and watched all of the first season before I watched the 2nd season. Of course, that's the order you would watch it in. But I wanted to watch the first season because it was going to be the same production team. So it was recorded at the same studio in New York with the same director, same actors and everything. So I was very aware that my scripts needed to be consistent with whatever choices they made. And there were a lot of choices that I didn't really like, but whatever choices that they had made in season 1, I felt it was more important to be consistent with that and going into the 2nd season. So, you know, I was making all kinds of notes about, you know, the specific wording of a spell that Erd did or things like that, nicknames that the characters had for one another, those kinds of things. So that was something that I tried to carry through and just to keep it consistent. I just feel like the consistency is really important. But I can't really think of anything like what you're saying where it had to be like colloquialism that was changed. Because one thing that I will do though, because I'm pretty well known for my TIFF notes, so in my scripts, I'm always putting notes about things that, like, okay, this is really important. You need to keep this in here in a certain way. This is going to be a reference. This is going to be repeated back, you know, in episode 15 or whatever. So I'll put notes in there like that to make sure that the director and the actors know that, this is important, that this needs to be kept a certain way because this is a reference to such and such, or this line is going to be repeated, and that kind of thing. Anything that I think would be informative to the actors, to the director, about the choice for certain words. And also in the scripts that I did, particularly the later scripts, the translation would be in the script too. So there would be one column that would have the script that I was writing, and then the column next to it would have the translation. So if there was a problem in the studio with it, the line just wasn't working for whatever reason, instead of just trying to adapt from my line, they could go back and look at what the translation was as well to try to reconcile it into something that would fit. Because when it comes down to it, I am just one person. And one important thing about writing these dub scripts is that they all have to be, whoever's writing them, we have to perform that script out loud to make sure that it's going to fit in those danged little mouth flaps. And the only way you can really make sure that the line's going to fit is that as the scriptwriter, I have to actually perform every single line of dialogue to make sure that it fits, and that it's not some weird tongue twister or whatever, but that it's the right length and that it's going to fit into the scene and into the mouth flaps and everything. So, but because of that, obviously I am not in the booth going to be playing every one of these roles. There will be other people playing them, and so the line that I wrote might be too short, might be too long, whatever. They need to change it, etc. And a lot of times, depending if it's like a really long line, I might, and a lot of other writers do this as well, have certain words in there that are bracketed so that you can leave them in or take them out, and you can just pull them right out of the line, and you don't even have to change anything else in the line. So you don't have to rewrite the whole thing. It's a tedious process a lot of times. It really is. I mean, sometimes it can be an artistically fulfilling thing, but it is often a really, really tedious process to massage all those words into those little danged animated mouth flaps. Yeah.
Like when you're doing voice acting or even other people that you've worked with, how many times has ad-libbing occurred where the actor just comes up with something and it just works?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's happened to me in the studio. There's not a tremendous amount of ad-libbing, just because again, it has to actually fit in the mouth flaps, and we don't have just copious extra amounts of recording time in the studio. But definitely, I mean, it's not uncommon at all that, on the spot, the director or the actor comes up with something that this would work even better, let's say it like this. Because another thing that's true is that as the script writer, I am responsible for the entire project. So it's a lot of things to keep in mind, whereas when I go in as the actor, I am strictly focused on my character. And so there are times that I've gone in and said, you know what, that just doesn't sound right to me as whoever, as this character. Would you mind if I said it like this, which, that's fine, because as the actor, and then of course it's always up to the director for them to approve it or not approve it, but as the actor, I'm only responsible for my character, so I'm a lot more laser focused on that and on, how my character, I think my character would talk or react to something, versus, as the script writer having to write all of the characters' dialogue. So, yeah. But there is some amount of ad-libbing, but not quite as ad-libbed as you might think of, watching an improv sketch or something, because usually you're not gonna just come out with it right there when you're recording or spring it on the director. Usually it's something that you discuss and it gets changed in that whole process. Sometimes it's a lot more time consuming than you might think. Now, I tell you where we do get to do ad libs is a lot of times like the background stuff. That's when we get to do ad libs. So if there's a whole bunch of something going on in the background and you can't really tell who's saying what, it's just a whole lot of the characters are in the background yelling or whatever, yes, that is when we all get to ad lib and make stuff up, and most of it you never even hear it anyway. It's all like mixed together and overlapping and in the background and not really distinct in the audio, and we do say all kinds of crazy stuff back then. So very true. Yeah.
Is there any role that you've auditioned for that you did really good in it, but you didn't get it? And like, is there anything like that?
Oh, you're awesome. Thank you. You know, I was sitting here wishing that would happen, and then it did. So that was like really magical. Let me see what other wishes. Like, okay, it's not working. Where's my stack of gold coins? That didn't happen. Thank you, though. Oh gosh, I would say all of them. I don't know. It's so hard. I mean, obviously, I would. It sounds like a glib answer, but I would like to play all of the characters that I auditioned for that I didn't get them. You know. So and look, it's true. Sometimes I have a feeling about an audition that I think that was really a pretty good audition, you know, and then I don't get it, and it is super disappointing. But I don't know. It's funny because sometimes there are roles that I've auditioned for that I thought that I had no chance of getting, and then I did get them. So, I mean, go figure. Or sometimes an audition that I do, and then I don't hear anything for months, and then they're like, oh yeah, you got that job. And I'm, what? That's surprising. But I would say, yeah, honestly, all of them. Yeah, I mean, all actors, we all think that we can play every part. We do. It's ridiculous, but we think we can play all the parts. Probably not, but, you know, we think we can. Yes? Anybody? I'm going to look at my watch now. Oh, we only have 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes left.
5 minutes.
Okay. So another thing that we often have to deal with is, I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but a lot of cultural references. So there might be references to somebody who's like a famous, like a pop star, a famous actor, somebody like that in Japan that everybody would know who that is. And really what we end up doing is just trying to pick like, well, who is the pop star or movie star or somebody who would like most equate to that situation for, you know, an American audience or a Western audience. And one of the examples I had, there was this show that I worked on, The Wallflower, if you guys know that. The anime was directed by Shinichi Watanabe. It was a crazy show. I had so many issues with that show, things that were very difficult to do, to translate, to localize into English. But there was one scene where the 2 main characters are having this huge argument, and they're fighting, and they're kind of in the background yelling at each other, and all the rest of the characters are in the foreground, and they're complaining about how these 2 fight all the time. And the translator's note was that the conversation that the characters are having about the fight, everything that they're saying is the lyrics to a famous Japanese pop song from the 1980s. So that was, yes, everything that they were saying, it was commenting about the argument, but it was also the lyrics to a song. So people in Japan, if they knew that song from the 80s, I have a feeling some of the crowd watching it might have been too young to get it, but whatever. So what I ended up doing in that case was I used the lyrics from a Tina Turner song. It actually came out in 1990, so it was pretty darn close. But the lyrics are like, I don't care who's wrong or right, I don't really want to fight no more. And so I used the lyrics from that song so that it was pretty close to what the characters were saying in Japanese, but then also with the added level of these are the lyrics to a famous pop song. So again, whether the audience who was watching that show in 2000, gosh, when did we do Excel Saga? Like 2002? Something like that. So if they, if those people still remembered that Tina Turner song, I don't know, but I thought like that was about as close as I could get to what they were going for. It's a lot of levels of something that you have to try to shoehorn into something where it may or may not fit, like putting a square peg in a round hole or something. But
And a turkey.
yeah, putting a turkey into a square hole. I don't know. It was crazy, but anyway, I really appreciate you guys coming. I'm going to go back down to my table for a little while, and I will be here tomorrow from 10 until about 5 o'clock, and tomorrow I'm doing a panel on voice acting at 3. So thank you very much for coming. And I don't know how to turn this off, so.
Just mic drop.
That would stop.
Probably on the board.
I'm guessing it's on the board.